Bass players don't always get the credit they deserve when it comes to hit songs especially. A lot of it comes down to their role, laying down the foundations of the track in a lower frequency range that isn't always front and center. When you're the casual listener, the bass can feel like it's just hanging out in the background while the melody and the vocals steal the spotlight. But the truth is, a killer bass line is what gives a song its groove and holds everything together. Coming up next, I'm going to attempt the impossible, naming 5 of the most killer bass lines of the rock era, including a guitar riff that probably invented heavy metal and is played by guitarists all the time in guitar shops around the globe, but it's actually a bass riff. Plus a killer bass line by one of rock's most legendary bands that tops dozens of lists of the greatest bass lines ever, but the band admittedly ripped it off a disco band. In fact, that disco band's bass line is the most sampled and ripped off pieces of music ever. So many great stories coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. If you know every episode of the Brady Bunch by heart, you're going to dig this channel of deep musical nostalgia. Make sure to subscribe below right now and make sure to sign up at professorofrock.com. We've got some athletes and actors and some different things coming up there. You'll not want to miss it. We're celebrating the great bassists today through 5 killer bass lines that really capsize radio, our headphones, jukeboxes, what have you. This was really difficult, but I think you'll appreciate my choices. So kicking off the countdown of the top 5 killer bass lines of all time, it's the band that shook radio to its core in the early 80s with a sound so complex, so polished, it seemed impossible it could come from only 3 dudes. Of course, I'm talking about Tom Sawyer by Geddy Lee and Rush.
Today's Tom Sawyer,
When it comes to prog rock giants, Rush is stacked with top-tier musicians at each position. Of course, there's only 3 positions. Neil Peart at drums, unparalleled. Alex Lifeson on guitar, absolutely elite. But if there's one member who might be the most accomplished in his field, it's the humble genius, Mr. Geddy Lee on the bass. Easily one of the greatest bass players to ever walk the earth. Today we're diving into his isolated bass track on Rush's classic Tom Sawyer. And if you're a musician, it's nothing short of mind-altering. The bass guitar, it often gets an unfair reputation as the boring instrument in a band, but its role is absolutely crucial, as you know. It sets the rhythm, keeps everything locked in, and guides both the band and the audience without demanding the spotlight. But then there are bassists like Geddy Lee, players who don't just hold down the groove, but take off at full speed, launching the song, the band, and the crowd into overdrive. So get this, for Tom Sawyer, Geddy swapped out his Rickenbacker 4001 for a Fender Jazz bass that he picked up at a pawn shop with incredible results. It just goes to show you that you don't have to pay inflated prices to create total magic. One of the most challenging parts of Geddy Lee's bass line in Tom Sawyer is its syncopation. Instead of sticking to predictable downbeats, he leans into the offbeats, creating a push and pull feel that adds to the song's deceptive complexity. The rhythm isn't just a simple groove. It's packed with offbeat accents and intricate syncopation that demand razor-sharp precision. Locking in with Neil Peart's elaborate drum patterns, that's no easy feat. But Geddy Lee makes it sound just effortless. Geddy's right-hand technique is key to the punchy tone of the Tom Sawyer bass line. His aggressive attack and dynamic accents make each note just pop, while his left-hand phrasing, hammer-ons, pull-offs, and slides, adds a smooth, fluid feel. It's that perfect balance of power and finesse that makes his playing so distinctive. Unlike bass lines that stick strictly to rhythm or melody, Tom Sawyer seamlessly blends both. Geddy Lee's bass doesn't just sit beneath the guitars, it weaves in and out, creating a counterpoint that adds depth and richness to the song's overall texture. Tom Sawyer, built around Geddy's extraordinary bass line, didn't cross over well. It actually stalled at number 44 on the Billboard Hot 100, to number 25 in the UK, number 24 in Canada, and number 8 on the mainstream rock chart in 81. But for hell's sake, the song is number 1 with a bullet in our hearts. The opening of this song, it just turned radio upside down. So coming in at number 4 in our countdown is the backbone of a song so controversial it sent old ladies into a tizzy. It's the impromptu brilliance of session player Herbie Flowers on Lou Reed's provocative hit, Walk on the Wild Side.
Take a walk on the wild side. Said, hey, babe.
It was 1972. Richard Nixon had just won re-election in a landslide against Democratic challenger George McGovern, securing another term as the President of the United States. Meanwhile, the Vietnam War raged on, showing no signs of slowing down. Amidst the turbulence of this time, a bold and boundary-pushing song emerged, challenging censorship and really captivating listeners around the world. Of course, I'm talking about Lou Reed's Walk on the Wild Side, often called a ballad of misfits and oddballs. Walk on the Wild Side defied expectations and somehow it became an unlikely cultural anthem. Its allure is almost hypnotic, pulling in generations of listeners. But to truly grasp the song's impact on the rock era, you have to dig into the rich backstory behind it.
Take a walk on the wild side. Said, hey, honey.
Lou Reed was, of course, an icon. Reclusive, unpredictable, and often difficult. His second album, Transformer, became a landmark of the glam rock era of the late 60s and early 70s. But Lou Reed was also known for his discontent and fiery temperament. Some even calling him a malcontented sociopath. So by 1970, after multiple lineup changes and a string of albums that failed to gain much traction, at least commercially, Lou Reed had had enough. His exit from the revered Velvet Underground wasn't a dramatic announcement at all. It was actually a moment at Max's Kansas City where he simply walked off the stage. He never looked back. After leaving the band, Reed retreated to his parents' home on Long Island, where, get this, he took a job as a typist at his father's tax accounting firm. He earned a modest $40 a week, at least according to his own recollection. After leaving the Velvet Underground and watching his debut solo album flop, Lou Reed found himself at a crossroads. He had a record deal with RCA, but he had no idea what he was going to do next. He just didn't know. During this time of pure uncertainty, David Bowie, a dedicated Velvet Underground fan, took notice of him. Coming off the success of Ziggy Stardust, Bowie had had enough influence to convince his record label to back a Lou Reed solo album. So David Bowie teamed up with his collaborator and guitarist Mick Ronson to co-produce that record. The first time David and Mick met Lou, he was in one of his classic reclusive antisocial moods. Mick remembered how he and David went backstage just to catch a glimpse of him before Lou hit the stage. Lou was just sitting there in a dark corner, almost like a bat, super quiet. He mumbled something that was totally indecipherable. And they didn't know what he said. But Bowie, he wasn't fazed at all. He turned on his charm, and before they knew it, they were talking about collaborating, and then Lou went on stage. So with David and Mick's influence, the musical arrangement of Walk on the Wild Side became something formative, starting with that unforgettable bass riff from session player Herbie Flowers. Now, Herbie, he was an old school jazz musician who usually played a stand-up double bass. To get that minimalist, dark vibe for Walk on the Wild Side, though, Herbie overdubbed the bass riff from his stand-up with a bass guitar. That's pretty cool. Everyone, and I mean everyone, was blown away by what he came up with. They didn't give him any specific direction, but in just like 20 minutes, he crafted one of the most famous bass lines ever. Now, Herbie was paid just 17 pounds for his work, but there's a funny twist to the payment. When he added the second bass part to the track, he didn't mention that the rules said he should get double payment for that. Bowie and Ronson, who were managing the tight recording budget, didn't realize they had to pay extra until after the song was done. But they were so, happy, so mesmerized with how it turned out, they didn't mind, coughing up that extra cash for that bass part.
I said, hey, honey, take a walk on the wild side.
Walk on the Wild Side, it captivated audiences around the world. The single rose to number 18 in Canada, went to number 15 in the Netherlands, number 10 in the UK, and it went to number 16 here on the Billboard Hot 100. It would have been a much higher, maybe even a number one hit, but a lot of radio stations refused to play it due to its controversial lyrics. It was actually Lou Reed's lone entry into the top 40. Moving on to number 3 on our countdown of the top 5 bass lines, it's one that gets more credit as a guitar riff, but in actuality, this riff started on the bass. Talking about Sunshine of Your Love by Cream. Now, Jack Bruce wrote the song, and he delivered one of the most memorable bass riffs of the rock era with Sunshine of Your Love. And it came out of one of those late-night writing sessions that rock musicians are famous for. And Jack Bruce and his lyricist friend Pete Brown had been at it for hours without much luck. Then out of nowhere, Jack picked up his double bass and played what would become the song's iconic riff. Pete glanced out the window, saw the first light creeping into the sky, and he wrote, "It's getting near dawn."
It's getting near dawn.
Jack brought the riff, melody, and lyrics to rehearsal where Eric Clapton added the turnaround chords, and just like that, they had rock and roll greatness. And really a song that may have invented heavy metal. But one final touch took it to another level. Engineer Tom Dowd suggested flipping the drum beat. He told Ginger Baker, "Play it like those old Western movies when the Indians appear." And that's how one of rock's greatest tracks came to be. Now, Jack Bruce's bass line is the backbone of Sunshine of Your Love, and he actually came up with it after seeing Jimi Hendrix in concert. All 3 members of Cream greatly admired Jimmy's unique style and sound. In a 2003 interview with Heaven magazine, Dutch journalist Kees van Wee asked Bruce which of his many songs best represented him. At first, he was torn between Pieces of Mind and Keep On Wondering. But then, of course, he changed his answer to Sunshine of Your Love. And his reasoning? It's based on a bass riff. And when you walk into a music shop, this is the song kids are always playing when they try out a guitar. But it's a bass riff. Another interesting fact about Sunshine of Your Love, the legendary hitman Ahmet Ertegun. He did not care for this song at all. He hated it. He called it psychedelic hogwash. But when Jack Bruce played the track at the Atlantic Records studios, Otis Redding and Booker T. Jones were in the house, and they loved it. They enthusiastically predicted that the song was going to be a smash hit. Ahmet, he wasn't often wrong, but he was this time. Sunshine of Your Love by Cream with Jack Bruce's fat bass lick went to number 25 in the UK, all the way to number 3 in Canada, and number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100. Coming out of the bridesmaid position, it was really tough not to put this one at number 1, I'll tell you. At number 2, we have a bass line so complex, it makes your brain hurt. Talking about Roundabout by Yes. The lyrics penned by lead vocalist John Anderson paint a picture of a psychedelic country life with a lot of references to driving. A roundabout, basically a traffic circle instead of a stoplight, comes up, which can totally confuse tourists who aren't used to them. Normally, navigating road fixtures doesn't make for the most poetic lyrics, but roundabout it sounds so great, and it fits the vibe of the song just so well. It's kind of like when John hit a roundabout in Scotland and realized he was getting closer to home. For so many bassists, there's nothing quite like Chris Squire's hard-hitting 16th note heavy bass line on Roundabout. Oh man, this riff is a total showstopper, flying by so quickly that most people are happy just to sit back and be amazed. Like I said, it makes my head hurt. For the rest of us, it's time to roll up our sleeves and take on one of prog rock's toughest bass riffs.
The words will make you out and out and spend the day.
From the beginning of Roundabout, Chris Squire stands out from the crowd with the fiery tones that he pulled from his Rickenbacker bass, roto-sound strings, and his smooth, expressive plectrum technique. Chris always preferred a clean sound over the boomy, dull tones that finger players were getting in the late 60s and early 70s. Actually, in a December 93 interview with Bass Player magazine, Chris Squire explained that he used heavy Herco picks and held them so the pointed side faced away from the bass, with the rounded side extending just past his thumb. When he did a downstroke, he would hit the string with the side of his thumb. And that result, you get the sharp pick attack followed by a smoother, rounder tone right after. On top of that, Chris Squire overdubbed his bass track using one of Steve Howe's old Gibson ES-150 hollow body guitars. Chris explained that they mic'd it acoustically and mixed it with his bass parts, which is what gave the sound such a bright, dynamic edge. For me, the bass line on Roundabout, it showcases a lost art. Talking about musicianship that will never be captured again. There'll never be another band like Yes, with such extraordinary players that made some of the most distinctive music of the rock era. Roundabout had a bit of a run in Japan, but it performed best in Canada, climbing to number 9 and number 13 on the Billboard Hot 100, which is pretty surprising for how complex it is. Here's what singer John Anderson told me about the track.
Why don't you take over and do a bass solo? Just throw it at it, It's very rare that you get a bass solo in a rock band, Boom, 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 boom. And off he went.
They say imitation is the highest form of flattery. If that's the case, Bernard Edwards and Nile Rodgers must be very flattered. Really, 2 songs share the number 1 spot here. I would have given it to Queen alone for Another One Bites the Dust. But Queen admitted that they ripped the bass line off of Chic's disco song. So Bernard Edwards and Nile Rodgers' collaboration, the all-time classic Good Times, with that nasty Bernard bass line, has become the most sampled song of all time, and it's my choice to be number 1 on our countdown of the top 5 bass lines. Now, back in the mid to late 70s, artists were seriously envious of Nile and Bernard for their insanely infectious music. These guys were incredible. Chic's sound brought this electrifying energy that made you want to dance like nothing else. Rolling Stones, Queen, Pink Floyd, the Bee Gees, Paul McCartney, pretty much every legendary artist out there, they were digging Chic's vibe. Good Times didn't just get people on the dance floor, it became a party anthem. Nile Rodgers shared the story of Good Times with Uncut magazine. He actually wrote Good Times the morning that he recorded it. Bernard was running a bit late to the studio, but Nile had already written out the charts for the band. He said, and I quote, "We were jamming when Bernard finally walked in and he asked the engineers, 'What the hell is that?' The engineer replied, 'I don't know, something that Nile wrote this morning.' Now, when Bernard was late, he'd always act like a puppy dog with his tail between his legs. Usually what we do is copy each other's ideas and build our parts from there." He also went on to say that they've been trying for years to nail what he called a walking bass line, putting it into all kinds of songs, but never quite getting it just right. And then one day, Nile just started shouting, "Walk," over Tony's drums. Bernard yelled back, "What?" And Nile shouted out again, "Walk." And then lo and behold, Bernard started walking. Even though his guitar part was strong on the downbeats, Bernard decided to push and go to the bass before he got to the chord change. He still had a ways to go, but they started to get this amazing extra funky thing. Bernard told the engineer, "Make it red, man," which is a recording expression that means to highlight a particular part of the music. And from there, they laid down the track in 1, maybe 2 takes. Now, Nile's lyrics for Good Times give a nod to Milton Ager's Happy Days Are Here Again, and also pull from About a Quarter to 9, a song made famous by Al Jolson.
Happy day.
Now Rodgers explained that these Depression-era references were a subtle way of commenting on the economic climate in the U.S. at the time. The song invites listeners to put on their roller skates and participate, which ties into the roller disco movement that peaked in 1979.
Let's get together. How about a 9:45?
In a 2015 interview, Rodgers also shared that Good Times was partly inspired by Kool and the Gang's 1974 hit, Hollywood Swinging. It's not the first time I've heard that.
Hollywood swinging.
The fun began with Bernard Edwards' iconic bass line, and Good Times would become one of the most copied and sampled records ever. DJs holding 2 copies of the record figured out they could create a continuous loop of the instrumental groove, laying down the perfect backdrop for MCs to rap over. This made the song a hit in dance clubs, especially in New York City, where the dance scene was buzzing. It's common knowledge that Queen bassist John Deacon borrowed from Good Times to come up with Another One Bites the Dust. That's why I can't give the number 1 to Another One Bites the Dust. It has to share with this because the bass line came from Good Times.
Another one bites the dust.
Bernard was actually a little bit annoyed that Queen didn't give them more credit for giving them the inspiration to create one of their biggest hits. And as I've mentioned before, there were some members of the music press that accused Chic of ripping off Queen, even though Good Times came out a year before Another One Bites the Dust, and Deacon clearly lifted it, something he would admit many, many times. But Queen wasn't the only one. Hundreds and hundreds of artists have taken their inspiration from the bass line, from Blondie's number 1 hit Rapture to the Sugar Hill Gang. So rap was starting to take off at New York block parties, and when Sylvia Robinson brought the Sugar Hill Gang together to record a rap song, they chose Good Times as their track. And in the studio, they looped it just like the DJs have been doing at the parties, even adding the string hits from the song.
The Sugar Hill Gang.
About 2 months after Good Times came out and was racing up the charts, Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang was released unabashedly right in the groove with Chic's dance sensation. Many music historians have called Rapper's Delight the first rap song, and perhaps the song that opened the rap genre to the white music audience. That's clearly been said many, many times.
Man, Hank, come on, Hank, sing that song. Check it out. When I'm the ladies pimp.
But it really came from Chic, let's be clear. Now, the lead vocal on Good Times was delivered by Alpha Anderson with backup from Fonzie Thornton, Lucy Martin, and Michelle Cobbs.
Let's cut the rug. Little child and jitterbug.
Sadly, the legendary funk mastermind Bernard Edwards passed away in 1996, and he was only 43 years old. It was actually just before a concert at the Budokan Arena in Tokyo when Edwards fell ill. But despite Nile Rodgers' insistence, Bernard refused to cancel the show. He pushed through it, and he performed, though at the time he really needed help. There was a moment during the set when Bernard blacked out for a few seconds, only to pick up where he left off. Now, thinking the absence of bass was part of an intentional improvisation, he didn't realize what had actually happened until the performance was over. After the show, Nile went to check on Bernard and asked how he was. Bernard simply replied, "I'm fine, I just need to rest." That would be the last time that Nile spoke to him. Later, Bernard retired to his hotel room where he was found dead by Nile. The cause of death was later determined to be pneumonia. But Nile Rodgers, ever the survivor, is still going strong. He continues to play shows with his new incarnation of Chic and also performs solo, keeping the spirit of the music alive. Good Times soared to number 1 on the Hot Soul singles, number 2 in Canada, number 3 on the dance chart. How it didn't reach number 1, that's nonsense. It went to number 5 in the UK, and it, of course, went to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in that 79. So that wraps up our countdown of the top 5 bass lines, but I gotta throw in a couple of honorable mentions, starting with Flea from Red Hot Chili Peppers and his wicked bass riff on Give It Away. Then my second honorable mention is Larry Graham's groovy bass line on Sly and the Family Stone's Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again. Larry pretty much pioneered the slap bass technique with this song. It's simple, direct, deep, soulful, and packed with funky energy. Graham's one-of-a-kind style pushed bass playing several steps into the future. Level 42's Mark King, Flea, Bootsy Collins, and all the other slap-happy bassists out there owe a massive debt to Larry Graham. And our third and final honorable mention has got to go to Daryl Hall and John Oates for the catchiest bass line of the 80s, in my opinion. I can't go for that, no can do, which directly inspired Michael Jackson's Billie Jean. Here's what Daryl told me about it.
And I was sitting at this little chord organ that was like that big. And I started playing boom, ba that doom, 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 doom. I just was doing it. And I started doing that, and I played the other hand. You know, I was basically just doing it all on this chord organ. And I turned on my trusty compy rhythm with Rock and Roll 1, boom, dick, dick, boom, dick, you know, and played along with that. And I wound up with, I said, turn the tape on, man, because they were all packing up. Everybody was packing their guitars up and everything. And I recorded, right then and there, I recorded me playing it along with the compy rhythm. And that was pretty much the song.
So there you have it. That's the countdown. What are your great bass lines of all time? What do you think's what are your 5 most killer bass lines ever? What are your memories of these songs? Let's have a great discussion and celebrate the bass player. Let's have a great discussion below. If you like our content, we invite you to subscribe. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.